I rise today to present ACR 135, which affirms the findings of the California Reparations Task Force in regards to the harms done to Black Californians over the course of California's history. The California Reparations Task Force was created through AB 3121 in 2020, authored by now Secretary of State Dr. Shirley Weber. Its purpose was to study the institution of slavery and its lingering negative effects on living African Americans, as well as develop reparation proposals for African Americans in California. AB 3121 also charged the California Department of Justice with providing administrative, technical, and legal assistance. The members of the Reparation Task Force, along with the Attorney General, released their report last June. We all know that the initial wealth of this country was built on the back of enslaved and trafficked African people. We all know that the history of exploitation, murder, abuse, and terror that the descendants of those enslaved from Africa have endured. But what we do not know is the role that California played. Because very few of us can accurately say that we have an in-depth knowledge of our own state's history. And although California joined the Union in 1850 as a free state, pro-slavery individuals held a great deal of power and influence that shaped our state legislature, state court system, and our representatives in U.S. Congress. And even after the U.S. Constitution enacted the 13th Amendment to, quote, pass all laws necessary and proper for abolishing all badges and incidents of slavery, end quote, local governments like California created new badges and incidents which, as the report revealed, have created innumerable harms which have impacted generations of Black Californians. Let me tell you about a man named Basil Campbell. Campbell was born enslaved in Missouri, where he married a woman named Mary Stevens, and they had 2 sons. In 1854, 4 years after California joined the Union as a free state, a man named J.D. Stevens bought Campbell for $1,200 and forcibly moved him to a small farm in Yolo County. Campbell never saw his wife or his 2 sons again. J.D. Stevens enslaved Basil Campbell in California for years until he felt that Stevens had paid off his debt. Over the rest of his life, Campbell married again, adopted his wife's children, and amassed a small fortune in land and livestock. A few years after his death in 1906, his 2 sons from his first marriage in Missouri filed a petition for a portion of Campbell's estate. A California appellate judge concluded that a marriage between enslaved people is, quote, not a marriage relation, and it's a mockery to speak of such, end quote. The land once owned by Campbell is now a nature preserve. Unfortunately, what happened to Mr. Campbell in California was not an isolated event. In 1852, scholars estimated that up to 1,500 enslaved persons of African descent lived here in California. So yes, California did allow for slavery to exist within our borders. That same year in 1852, California passed and enforced the Fugitive Slave Law that made us more pro-slavery than most other free states. And here are some other examples of the harms that have occurred throughout California's 174-year history. In 1874, California Supreme Court ruled that segregation in schools were legal, 22 years before U.S. Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson. And today, California is the 6th most segregated state in the country for African American students. Operating under a state law for urban redevelopment, San Francisco declared that the predominantly Black neighborhood of Western Addition was blighted and therefore destroyed the Fillmore, San Francisco's most prominent African American neighborhood and business districts. The Ku Klux Klan was allowed to establish chapters all over this state, and many elected officials were members. In the 1920s in Los Angeles, the mayor, the district attorneys, and police officers were all members of this terrorist organization. Our state enacted policies to prevent Black Californians from living in certain neighborhoods, testifying against a white man in court, and from interracial marriage, just to name a few. If you haven't read the report, and I've said this so many times over the last few weeks, or at minimum, the executive summary, then I strongly encourage that you do. ACR 135 is not only a resolution to affirm the task force report, it is also meant to educate ourselves on California's history. Ida B. Wells states, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." The Reparations Task Force turned the light of truth, and this is laid out in ACR 135. We cannot move forward as a state unless we learn about and acknowledge the harms of the past and begin to repair them. And ACR 135 is the first step in that acknowledgement. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.